My husband calls me a boring librarian, unaware that his entire real estate empire stands on land I secretly own. As I watched him drag his mistress into the Onyx Tower, he thought he was getting away with the ultimate betrayal. He was wrong. I was not just witnessing the end of our marriage. I was holding the brass key that would force him to his knees. My name is Maya. At 30 years old, I spend my days inhaling the dust of centuries, restoring antique manuscripts that are falling apart at the seams. It is quiet work, delicate and patient, much like the way I tried to fix my marriage to Preston. My husband is the CEO of Vanguard Dynamics, a man who builds steel skyscrapers that pierce the clouds while I glue together broken spines. For months, Preston had been a ghost in our penthouse. He came home late every night, smelling of scotch and expensive perfume, always claiming he was stuck in strategic meetings with international partners. I wanted to believe him because the alternative was a truth I was not ready to face. Tonight, the sky broke open. A storm hammered the city, turning the streets into rivers of oil and neon reflections. When Preston left the house after a hurried dinner, checking his watch 3 times in 1 minute, something inside me snapped. I grabbed my coat and followed him. My rusted Ford sedan rattled as I pushed it to keep up with his silver McLaren. He drove aggressively, weaving through the traffic with the arrogance of a man who believed the world would always move out of his way. I followed him all the way to the Onyx Tower. It was a fortress of glass and light, a place where people went to be seen or to hide in plain sight. I parked my car in the shadows and walked into the lobby. The air inside was cold and smelled of lilies. I did not have to look far. Preston was standing near the elevators, but he was not discussing business strategy. He was wrapping his arms around Valerie, his new marketing director. She threw her head back and laughed, her hand resting possessively on his chest. God, Preston. Look at her coat, Valerie said, her voice carrying across the marble floor. It looks like something she dug out of a donation bin. It smells like mothballs from here. Preston chuckled, a sound that chilled me more than the rain outside. I stepped into the light. Preston saw me. He did not flinch. He did not look guilty. He looked annoyed, as if I were a stain on his pristine suit. Maya, he said, his voice flat. What are you doing here? You look pathetic. You said you had a meeting, I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. I am in a meeting, Preston sneered, tightening his grip on Valerie. I am meeting with someone who actually matches my stature. You are just a faded shadow, Maya. You walk around like a ghost. You do not belong in this world. You never did. The cruelty was swift and efficient, just like his business deals. He did not drag it out. I want a divorce, Preston announced, his voice loud enough for the concierge to hear. I am done coming home to a boring librarian. You contribute nothing to my career, nothing to my image. I need a queen, not a servant. I stood there, frozen, as he gestured to the door. Go back to the penthouse and pack. Actually, do not bother. I will have security bring your things down. 30 minutes later, I was standing on the curb outside our building. The rain was relentless. Preston threw my suitcase onto the wet pavement. The latch broke, and my clothes spilled out into the muddy gutter. Valerie stepped out from the dry shelter of the awning, twirling a diamond ring on her finger. It was a cushion-cut diamond, the exact one Preston had promised me for our 5th wedding anniversary next month. Go back to the slums. Sweetie, Valerie purred, admiring the stone under the streetlights. Preston said this was just collecting dust in the safe. Much like you. It looks better on me. Don't you think I knelt on the wet asphalt? The cold water soaked through my jeans. I gathered my ruined sweaters and books, shoving them back into the broken suitcase. I did not cry. Tears were a luxury for women who had someone to comfort them. I had no one. As I shoved my hand into my coat pocket to warm my freezing fingers, I felt cold metal. It was the heavy brass key my grandfather left me. Preston loomed over me one last time. Do not even think about asking for alimony. He spat. My lawyers drafted that prenup to be ironclad. You get nothing. But here. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a few bills, crumpling them into a ball and tossing them at my chest. $200, he said. Consider it a taxi fee. Now get out of my sight before I call the police for trespassing. The Starlight Motel was the kind of place people went to disappear or to die, and for a moment, I felt like I was doing a little bit of both. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and industrial cleaner. The carpet was sticky. The heater rattled like a dying engine, blowing lukewarm air that did nothing to chase away the chill in my bones. It was a stark contrast to the heated marble floors and Egyptian cotton sheets I had slept in just 24 hours ago. Yet as I sat on the sagging mattress, I felt a strange, expanding sensation in my chest. It was relief. The suffocating weight of pretending to be perfect for a man who despised me was finally gone. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the object that had saved me from complete despair. It was a heavy brass key, tarnished by time and sweat. I ran my thumb over the ridges, and suddenly I was 7 years old again, sitting on the porch with Grandpa Silas. He was a man made of iron and soot, a railway worker with calloused hands that could crush a stone, but always held me with infinite gentleness. I remembered his voice, raspy from years of inhaling coal dust. Maya. Come here, he had whispered on his deathbed, pressing this very key into my palm. You are the keeper of the flame. When the fire goes out, when you feel like the dark is going to swallow you whole, go to warehouse number 4. I had thought he was delirious. I had thought it was just the ramblings of a dying old man who spent his life fixing tracks. I was wrong. The next morning, the rain had stopped, leaving the sky a bruised purple. I drove my rattling Ford out to the industrial district on the edge of the city. It was a graveyard of steel and concrete, a place where factories went to rust. Warehouse number 4 looked like a skeleton. The windows were boarded up, and the brick facade was crumbling. To anyone else, it looked abandoned. But as I approached the heavy steel door, I noticed something strange. The dust on the handle was undisturbed, but there was a faint hum coming from the ground beneath my feet, and I spotted a camera lens no bigger than a pinhead embedded in the rusted door frame. This was not a ruin. It was a fortress disguised as a wreck. My hands shook as I slid the brass key into the lock. It turned with a smooth, oiled click that sounded loud in the morning silence. The heavy door swung open, revealing a staircase leading down into the dark. I descended. At the bottom, motion sensors flickered to life, illuminating a vast underground bunker that stole the breath from my lungs. It was not filled with old train parts or scrap metal. It was a pristine archive. Rows of gray steel filing cabinets stretched out into the gloom, climate-controlled and spotless. I walked to the nearest desk, where a single envelope lay waiting. It had my name on it in Grandpa Silas's handwriting. I tore it open. My dearest Maya, the letter began. If you are reading this, the world has been unkind to you. They think I was just a laborer, a man who hammered spikes into the ground, but I was a buyer of shadows. When this city was young, when land was cheap because no one saw the future, I bought it. All of it. My heart pounded against my ribs like a trapped bird. I began pulling open the drawers. They were packed with thousands of land deeds, stock certificates, and bonds dating back to the 1950s. My grandfather had not just worked on the railway. He had owned the land the railway was built on. He had bought the rights to the riverbanks, the downtown blocks, and the industrial zones. I pulled out a thick file labeled Current Leases. My eyes scanned the documents until they landed on a specific address, 101 Skyline Avenue. I gasped, dropping the file. The paper fluttered to the concrete floor. No, I whispered, my voice echoing in the vault. It can't be. The 101 Skyline Avenue was the location of the Vanguard Dynamics headquarters. Preston's glass tower, the symbol of his ego, the building he claimed was the crown jewel of his empire, was sitting on land owned by the Silas and Maya Trust. He was not the king of the city. He was my tenant. At the bottom of the letter, a business card was stapled to the paper. It was thick, creamy cardstock with gold embossing Harrison Wolfe, attorney at law. I pulled out my cracked phone and dialed the number. My fingers were trembling so hard I almost dropped the device. It rang once. Wolfe and Associates. A deep, gravelly voice answered instantly. "Hello," I said, my throat tight. My name is Maya. I have a key." There was a pause on the other end, heavy with significance. "Ms. Maya," the man breathed out, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "We have been waiting for this call for 10 years. It is finally time to activate the inheritance." The Zenith Spire was not just a building, it was a needle stitching the sky to the earth, rising 50 floors above the Onyx Tower where my husband thought he ruled the world. I walked into the lobby, my sneakers squeaking on the polished granite, but this time, no one sneered at me. The security guards nodded with deference, clearly briefed on my arrival. I entered the corner office of Wolfe and Associates. Harrison Wolfe stood by the window. He was a man whose reputation could curdle milk. They called him the Silver Wolf of Wall Street, a predator who tore companies apart for sport. But when he turned to face me, his eyes softened. He did not just shake my hand, he bowed his head, a gesture of old-world loyalty that nearly brought me to my knees. "Welcome home, Ms. Maya," Harrison said, his voice deep and resonant. "The Underground Railway Group is at your command." He slid a leather-bound portfolio across the mahogany desk. I opened it. The numbers were staggering. The text blurred before my eyes as I realized the scope of what my grandfather had built. I did not just own a few warehouses. I owned 40% of the commercial real estate in the city. My finger traced the line items until it stopped at 2 familiar addresses. "The Vanguard headquarters," I whispered. "And the penthouse at the Celestial Gardens." "Correct," Harrison said, pouring me a glass of water. "Mr. Preston has been paying rent to your trust for 7 years. Technically, you are his landlord." A laugh bubbled up in my throat, bitter and sharp. The man who had thrown me out onto the street was living in my house. But I could not enjoy this victory yet. I caught my reflection in the glass of a framed diploma. My hair was frizzy from the humidity, my eyes were red-rimmed, and my clothes hung off me like rags. "I need access to funds." "Harrison," I said, standing up straighter. "Immediately. I cannot destroy a king while dressed like a beggar." "Your accounts are already active," he replied, handing me a black card made of anodized titanium. "The limit does not exist. I spent the next 3 hours in the district where price tags were never displayed. I avoided the flashy brands Valerie adored, the ones that screamed their worth with giant gold logos. I went to the quiet ateliers, the places that smelled of cedar and raw silk. I bought tailored trousers that cut the air like knives, silk blouses in shades of charcoal and midnight blue, and a structured blazer that felt like armor. I swept my hair back into a sleek, severe bun. When I looked in the mirror, the librarian was gone. A CEO stared back. I returned to Harrison's office, placing my new leather bag on the chair. "Now," I said, my voice steady, "let us talk about my husband." Harrison opened a digital file on the wall screen. It showed a graph plummeting downward in red lines. "Preston is desperate," Harrison explained, tapping the screen. "He is leveraging everything on a new mega project called the Titan. He believes it will redefine the skyline. But to fund it, he has overextended himself. He owes $300 million to various banks, and he has used his company stock as collateral." I studied the red lines. They looked like bleeding veins. Preston had gambled our future, my future, On his ego. Do not evict him, I commanded, turning from the screen to face the city below. That is too easy. It is too quick. I want to buy his debt. Harrison raised an eyebrow, a flicker of a smile touching his lips. You want to acquire his loans? He asked. You want to become his creditor. I want to become his only creditor, I said, and for the first time in days, I smiled. It was a cold, dangerous thing. Buy up every single bad debt he has. Consolidate them. I want to hold the leash. When he tries to run, I want to be the one who chokes him. Harrison closed the file and nodded. Consider it done, he said. We will have the noose ready by morning. The Rosewood Country Club smelled of old money and fresh hydrangeas. It was the kind of place where a membership cost $50,000 a year and the waiters knew which wives were being cheated on before the wives did. I stood at the entrance of the ballroom, watching my mother-in-law, Genevieve, holding court at the center table. She was draped in pearls, sipping champagne, and doing what she did best, which was destroying reputations. She was a failed gold digger from the start, Genevieve announced loudly to a circle of eager socialites. My poor Preston. He tried to elevate her, but you cannot wash the poverty off some people. We had to cut her loose before she dragged the Vanguard name into the mud. Clara, Preston's sister, nodded vigorously. She wore polyester to the gala last year. Can you imagine? It was humiliating. I signaled the event coordinator. He stepped up to the microphone and cleared his throat. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our mystery platinum donor for the evening, Ms. Maya. The room went silent. I walked in. I was not wearing polyester. I was wearing a structured white suit from a designer who did not advertise, paired with emerald earrings that cost more than Genevieve's car. I moved through the crowd not like a mouse, but like a predator gliding through tall grass. Genevieve's jaw dropped. She stood up, her face flushing a mottled red. Maya, she sputtered, her glass tilting dangerously. What are you doing here? And where did you get those clothes? She marched over to me, her eyes narrowing. You spent the divorce settlement already, she hissed, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. You used my son's hard-earned money to play dress-up in these cheap knockoffs. You are pathetic. I smiled. It was a polite, terrifying smile. I have not received a single penny from your son. Genevieve, I said smoothly. Preston made sure of that. This is my own money. But speaking of knockoffs, I turned my gaze to the large oil painting hanging behind her, the centerpiece of her auction. It was a landscape she had been boasting about all afternoon. That piece, I said, raising my voice slightly so the art collector standing nearby could hear. You listed it as an original 19th century landscape. Correct. Of course, Genevieve snapped. It has been in my family for generations. That is unfortunate. I replied, stepping closer to the canvas. Because the cerulean blue used in this sky, it is synthetic. It was not invented until 1930. And if you look at the brushstrokes here, the cracking pattern suggests rapid drying agents. This is a reproduction. Genevieve. A very expensive fake. The room gasped. The art collector adjusted his glasses and leaned in. My God, she is right. Genevieve turned pale. You act like you know everything just because you glue old books together. I restore history. Genevieve, I said coldly. I know how to spot a fraud when I see one. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Clara was rushing toward me, a large glass of Cabernet Sauvignon in her hand. She pretended to trip, launching the red liquid straight at my white suit. I did not panic. I simply took one smooth step to the left. The wine splashed harmlessly past me and landed squarely on Clara. It soaked the front of her pastel chiffon dress, turning it a gruesome, bloody red. Oh no, Clara shrieked, looking down at her ruined gown. My dress. It is ruined. You really should be more careful. Clara, I said, adjusting my cuff. Red is not your color. I leaned in close to Genevieve, who was shaking with rage. You should tell your son to check his loan agreements, I whispered into her ear, my voice soft as velvet. Interest rates are rising. And the sharks are circling. I turned and walked away, leaving them in a puddle of wine and humiliation. My phone buzzed as I reached my car. It was Preston. What did you do? He screamed the moment I answered. My mother is crying hysterically. She says you humiliated her. I will sue you. I will drag you to court for harassment. You have no idea who you are messing with. You useless. I interrupted him, my voice calm. See you in court. Preston. But remember one thing. I paused, letting the silence stretch. You will be the one begging me. I hung up and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. The game had officially begun. The financial noose tightened around Preston's neck exactly as I had planned. For weeks, Harrison had been making quiet phone calls to every major bank in the city, whispering doubts about the liquidity of Vanguard Dynamics. One by one, the credit lines dried up. The Titan, Preston's vanity project, was stalled, bleeding money by the hour. He was desperate, and desperation makes men stupid. Valerie, ever the helpful leech, provided the solution I had planted for her to find. She told him about a new, aggressive private equity firm called Iron Rail Ventures. She did not know? Of course. That Iron Rail was a shell company I had incorporated just 3 days after my divorce. I sat in the darkened observation room behind a one-way mirror, watching my husband stride into the conference room. He looked tired, but his arrogance was still intact, plastered over his anxiety like a cheap veneer. He sat opposite 2 of my employees who were posing as investors. I do not need a lecture on the terms, Preston said, waving his hand dismissively at the thick contract on the table. I am Preston Vanguard. My name is the guarantee. I just need the capital to finish the cladding on the tower. Once the Titan opens, well, the returns will be astronomical. We require strict adherence to the ethical conduct clauses. Mr. Vanguard, one of my agents said, pushing the document toward him, and the immediate asset recall clause. If you violate our standards, or if the project falls behind schedule by even 1 day, we own everything. Preston laughed. It was a hollow, barking sound. Ethical conduct. Please, he scoffed, clicking his gold pen. I wrote the book on business ethics, and the schedule is fine. Just give me the pen. I watched, holding my breath, as he leaned over the mahogany table. He did not read a single page. He did not see the trapdoor waiting beneath his feet. With a flourish, Preston signed his name. $50 million. He grinned, tossing the pen down. Wired to my account by noon. Pleasure doing business with you. He had just pledged his entire personal stock portfolio and the trademark rights to the Vanguard Dynamics name as collateral. He had signed his death warrant, and he was smiling about it. Goodbye, Preston, I whispered to the glass, my reflection superimposed over his face. The moment the money hit his account, Preston did not order steel or pay his contractors. He went shopping. The next day, social media was flooded with pictures of a cherry-red supercar with a bow on the hood. He had bought it for Valerie. In the caption, he announced their official engagement, calling her his true partner in success. It was sickening, but it was also evidence. Harrison walked into my office later that afternoon, his face grim. We have the internal reports from your mole in accounting, Harrison said. Preston is not just spending the loan on cars. He is embezzling directly from the operational fund to cover his gambling debts, and it gets worse. To save money on the Titan, he has switched the fire-retardant cladding to a cheaper, non-compliant aluminum composite. My blood ran cold. He was not just a thief. He was endangering lives. He was turning that building into a vertical torch just to save a few pennies. He is going to kill people, I said, my voice shaking with rage. "We can stop him now," Harrison suggested. "We have enough to call in the loan." I looked at the calendar on my desk. In 3 days. Preston was hosting the topping out ceremony for the Titan. It was supposed to be his moment of triumph. A televised event with the mayor and the press to celebrate the placement of the final beam. "No," I said, standing up and walking to the window. "We wait. He wants an audience, I will give him one." I turned back to Harrison. "We strike at the ceremony. I want everyone to see him fall. I want the cameras rolling when I take it all back." The laptop screen glowed in the darkness of my study, illuminating the glass of wine I had not yet touched. Hacking into the Vanguard Dynamics server did not require a team of cybercriminals. It only required knowing that my ex-husband was a creature of habit who believed he was too important to be hacked. I typed in his password, the same one he had used since College Vanguard 1. The system granted me access immediately. I navigated through the labyrinth of folders until I found the procurement logs for the Titan. My eyes widened as I cross-referenced the invoices. On paper, the building was clad in top-tier, fire-resistant titanium panels. In reality, the purchase orders showed shipments of Grade C aluminum composite, a material so flammable it had been banned in 3 countries. He was not just cutting corners, he was wrapping a skyscraper in gasoline. As I dug deeper into his private messages, looking for financial trails, I stumbled upon a thread between Valerie and a man named Roger from Sterling Corp., Preston's biggest rival. "He is distracted." Valerie wrote, "I sent you the bid numbers for the waterfront project. When do I get my commission?" I leaned back in my chair, a cold smile touching my lips. My husband's mistress was selling him out for pocket change. A part of me considered sending the screenshots to Preston to shatter his delusion that he was loved. But I stopped myself. Valerie was an infection, and I needed Preston's immune system to be weak. The enemy of my enemy is a tool. I whispered to the empty room. Let her bleed him dry. The next morning, a man named Elias came to see me. He was a former structural engineer for Vanguard, a man with gray hair and hands that shook as he held a coffee cup. I tried to tell him. "Ms. Maya," Elias said, his voice trembling. I told him the foundation concrete wasn't curing right. He fired me on the spot. Elias reached into his jacket and pulled out a digital recorder. "I recorded our last meeting," he said, sliding it across the desk. "For insurance." I pressed play. Preston's voice filled the room, loud and dismissive. "I do not care about the safety inspector. Elias, I paid him $50,000 to look the other way. Just pour the damn concrete, I stopped the recording. That was it. That was the final nail. By the end of the week, the conference table in Harrison's office was buried under stacks of paper. We had proof of wire fraud, bribery, gross negligence, and corporate espionage. But the most damning document lay on top the loan agreement with Iron Rail Ventures. The morality clause stated clearly that any illegal activity would trigger an immediate default, granting the lender full seizure of assets. Harrison looked at the pile of evidence, then up at me. His expression was solemn. "Maya," he said softly, "this will send him to prison for 20 years. It will destroy everything his family built for 3 generations. Do you want to offer him a settlement, a chance to step down quietly?" I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline where the Titan was rising like a jagged tooth. "No negotiation," I said, my voice devoid of mercy. "Total destruction." He threw me out in the rain like garbage. I am just returning the favor. That afternoon, a courier arrived with a heavy cream envelope. Inside was an invitation to the topping out ceremony of the Titan. The calligraphy was elegant, but at the bottom, Preston had scrawled a note in blue ink. "Come watch successful people work. Maybe you will learn something." I ran my thumb over the ink. He thought he was inviting a spectator. He did not know he was inviting his executioner. "Harrison," I called out, tossing the invitation onto the desk. Call the stylist. What are you wearing? He asked. Red, I replied. Blood red, the color of warning, and victory. The grand hall of the Titan smelled of ozone and expensive cologne. It was a cathedral of glass and steel, filled with the city's elite who had come to worship at the altar of Preston Vanguard. Senators rubbed elbows with tech moguls, while waiters navigated the crush with trays of caviar. On the raised dais, Preston stood like a monarch, his hand resting possessively on the small of Valerie's back. She wore silver, shimmering like a disco ball, but her smile was tight. To their left, Genevieve and Clara sat on velvet chairs, scanning the crowd with the bored disdain of royals forced to mingle with peasants. I did not slip in through the service entrance as they expected. I walked straight onto the red carpet. My dress was a violent, screaming red silk that flowed around me like liquid fire. It was cut dangerously low in the back and high in the leg, a garment designed to stop hearts and traffic. As I stepped into the atrium, the flashbulbs shifted, one by one. The photographers turned away from the stage and toward me. The murmurs started like a ripple and turned into a wave. I saw Valerie's smile falter. I saw the color drain from her face as she realized she had just become invisible. Preston spotted me. His eyes bulged. He snapped his fingers at the head of security, pointing a trembling finger in my direction. "Get her out of here," he mouthed, his face contorted with rage. 2 burly guards started toward me, but they never made it. Harrison stepped out from the crowd, flanked by 4 men in windbreakers emblazoned with U.S. Marshal. They formed a wall between me and the security team. Harrison simply held up a hand, and the guards stopped dead in their tracks, confused and intimidated by the federal badges. Preston saw the marshals, and for a split second, panic flickered in his eyes. But his ego was a powerful drug. He shook his head, adjusted his tie, and stepped up to the podium, tapping the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Preston's voice boomed, echoing off the high ceilings. "Thank you for joining us to witness history. The Titan is not just a building. It is a testament to vision. It is proof that when you have the courage to dream big, you leave the small minds behind." He paused for effect, staring directly at me with a smirk. Some people said this could not be done. They said I was reaching too high. Well, look around you. I am the one standing on the stage. I stood perfectly still in the center of the aisle. I looked up at the lighting booth, where a young technician named Leo was watching me. I had paid off his student loans that morning. I gave him a single, imperceptible nod. Suddenly, a screech of feedback tore through the room. Preston winced and tapped the mic again, but it was dead. The sound system went silent. Then, the massive LED screen behind him, which had been displaying a looping animation of the Vanguard logo, flickered black. "What is going on?" Preston yelled, his voice sounding thin without amplification. "Fix it." The screen roared back to life, but the logo was gone. In its place was a scanned invoice. It was blown up to the size of a billboard. The text was unmistakable. Order number 4099. Grade C aluminum composite, non-fire rated. The crowd gasped. A senator near the front row adjusted his glasses and whispered to his aide. Before Preston could react, the image shifted. It was an email chain. The subject line read, "Safety Inspector Payment." The body of the email, sent from Preston's personal account. Red wire the $50,000 to his offshore account. "I want that permit signed by Friday." "Turn it off," Preston screamed, waving his arms at the booth. "Cut the power." But Leo was gone, and the show was just getting started. The screen shifted to video footage. It was grainy, taken from a security camera inside a high-end restaurant. It showed Valerie sitting across from a man who was definitely not Preston. Audio flooded the room, crystal clear. "He is such a useful idiot," Valerie's voice rang out. accompanied by her cruel laughter. Preston actually thinks I love him. I am just waiting for the stock to vest, and then I am taking half and running. He can keep his crumbling tower. On screen. She leaned over and kissed the other man. The silence in the hall was absolute. Every eye turned to the stage. Preston stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. He turned slowly to look at the massive screen where his humiliation was playing on a loop. Valerie let out a strangled cry, her hands flying to her mouth as she stumbled backward, knocking over a flower arrangement. She looked for an exit, but the crowd had closed ranks, creating a wall of judgmental stares. I stood alone in my red dress, watching the empire crumble. It was beautiful. Turn that screen off, I order you to cut the power. Preston screamed, his face a mask of purple rage as he slammed his fist against the podium. The feedback whined, but the damning images remained frozen on the giant LED wall behind him. Harrison Wolfe calmly walked onto the stage, ignoring Preston's outburst. He took a handheld microphone from his pocket and switched it on. His deep voice cut through the chaos like a gavel. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the inconvenience," Harrison announced, his tone devoid of emotion. "But this ceremony is officially concluded. Federal agents are currently securing the exits. This building is now a sealed crime scene." Preston lunged at him. He grabbed Harrison by the lapels of his suit, shaking him with desperate, manic strength. "Who do you think you are?" Preston spat, saliva flying from his mouth. "I am the owner of this building. I am Preston Vanguard. You are trespassing on my property." Harrison did not flinch. He simply placed a hand on Preston's wrist and removed it with humiliating ease, shoving him back. "You own nothing, Preston," Harrison said coldly. "You are a debtor who has defaulted on a $50 million loan with catastrophic breach of contract. You are not the owner. Your creditor is standing right there." Harrison pointed into the darkness of the auditorium. A single spotlight cut through the gloom, finding me instantly. The beam illuminated my red dress, turning me into a pillar of flame in the center of the room. I heard the collective intake of breath from the audience. I began to walk. My heels clicked rhythmically on the polished concrete floor, echoing in the silence as I ascended the stairs to the stage. I stopped 3 feet away from Preston. He looked at me as if he were seeing a ghost, his eyes wide and bloodshot. "Maya," he whispered, his voice trembling. "What?" "What is this?" I picked up the microphone Harrison had left on the podium. "You told me I never contributed anything to your career." "Preston," I said, my voice steady and amplified to every corner of the room. "You were right. I did not contribute to your fraud. I did not contribute to your bribery. And I certainly did not contribute to the fire hazard you built to save money. I did not build your empire of lies. I just bought it." I turned to the audience, addressing the cameras that were now zooming in on my face. "My name is Maya. I am the sole owner of Iron Rail Ventures, the company that holds the debt on this project. I am also the head of the Silas and Maya Trust, which owns the land this tower sits on." I turned back to Preston, who was swaying on his feet. "You violated the morality clause of your loan agreement when you bribed the safety inspector," I continued, pulling a document from my clutch. "According to the contract you signed without reading, that triggers an immediate asset recall. Effective this morning, the board has removed you as CEO. Your shares in Vanguard Dynamics have been seized to cover your debt and your personal assets, the penthouse, the cars, the accounts. They have been liquidated." Preston fell back against the podium, gasping for air. "No," he wheezed. You can't do this." I am the visionary Valerie, realizing the ship was sinking, tried to step toward me, putting on her best mask of sisterly concern. "Maya, listen," she stammered, wringing her hands. "I had no idea. He forced me into this. I was just an employee following orders. We can work together. Right, I can help you run marketing." I laughed. a sharp sound that made her flinch. I reached into my bag and pulled out a stack of high-resolution photos, the ones showing her with the competitor, mocking Preston. I tossed them into the air. They fluttered down around her like confetti. "You are fired, Valerie," I said, "and do not bother looking for your new car in the parking lot. It was purchased with company funds, so it has already been repossessed. I suggest you call a cab, if you can afford one." From the side of the stage, a shriek pierced the air. Genevieve and Clara charged forward, their faces twisted with hate. "You ungrateful little witch!" Genevieve screamed, raising her handbag to strike me. "I will kill you! Give me back my son's money before she could reach me!" 2 police officers tackled them. Clara kicked and screamed as handcuffs were snapped onto her wrists. "Let me go!" Clara shrieked. "Do you know who I am? I am a vanguard." "You are an accomplice to wire fraud," the officer replied, dragging her away. I stood alone in the center of the stage, surrounded by the ruins of their arrogance, watching the police drag my tormentors away. The flashing red lights of the squad cars outside reflected against the glass walls, mixing with the color of my dress. It was a perfect match. The silence that followed my revelation was shattered by a sound I never thought I would hear. It was the sound of Preston Vanguard hitting his knees. The man who had once thrown my suitcase into a muddy gutter was now crawling across the stage, his expensive suit dragging on the floor. He reached out, his sweaty hands clutching the hem of my red silk gown as if it were a lifeline. "Maya, baby, please," Preston sobbed, looking up at me with eyes full of terrified tears. "I was wrong. I was so wrong. We can fix this. We can make it work. You know I love you. I did it all for you. I wanted to give you the world. I looked down at him. I searched my heart for anger, for satisfaction, even for hate. But there was nothing left. There was only a cold, distant pity." I gently pulled my dress from his grip, stepping back as if he were contagious. "You did not do this for me, Preston," I said, my voice quiet but amplified clearly over the speakers. "You did it for your ego. You did it because you are small and you needed a big tower to feel tall. And do not call me your wife. You divorced me. Remember, you threw me away because I was broken. Now you are the one who is broken." Before he could answer, the heavy thud of boots vibrated through the stage floor. 3 officers marched up the stairs. The lead detective, a stern woman with a badge on her belt, stepped in front of Preston. "Preston Vanguard," she stated, her voice cutting through his sobbing. "You are under arrest for commercial bribery, wire fraud, and grand larceny. You have the right to remain silent." As the cold steel of the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Preston snapped. The facade of the repentant husband vanished, replaced by the cornered rat he truly was. He began to thrash, spitting and screaming. "It wasn't me, it was her!" he shrieked, jerking his head toward Valerie, who was being restrained by security. "It was Valerie. She made me sign those papers. She distracted me and my mother. She pushed me too hard. I am innocent. I am a victim here." Valerie let out a high-pitched scream as the guards began to drag her toward the exit. She fought them, flailing her arms. "My ring," she yelled, pointing to the floor where her engagement ring had fallen during the scuffle. "Grab my diamond. It is worth $500,000. I picked up the microphone one last time. "Leave it," I said, my voice dry. "It is synthetic. Preston is too cheap to buy real diamonds. It is worth about $50. Valerie froze, her face crumbling as the guards hauled her out the doors. On the other side of the stage, Genevieve was shrieking at Harrison, waving her finger in his face. "You cannot do this," she yelled. "I am a vanguard. My home is off limits. I have rights." Harrison adjusted his glasses, looking at her with mild amusement. "Actually, madam," Harrison said smoothly, "your villa was listed as collateral on the secondary loan Preston took out last month. Ms. Maya just foreclosed on it. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises. Genevieve's eyes rolled back in her head. She collapsed into the arms of a police officer, fainting dead away. The stage was a chaotic scene of shouting police, flashing lights, and ruined lives. Yet, standing in the center of it all, I felt a profound sense of stillness. I was not happy. I was not gloating. I just felt light. The heavy cloak of inadequacy Preston had draped over my shoulders for years was finally gone. I walked to the front of the stage, facing the wall of press cameras. The reporters shouted questions, thrusting microphones toward me. I raised a hand, and they fell silent. Vanguard Dynamics is no more. I announced, my voice ringing out with finality. This building will be stripped of its name. From tomorrow, it will be known as Silas Tower. I paused, thinking of my grandfather and his calloused hands. And it will not be a playground for the rich. I continued, it will be a center for innovation. We will provide funding and workspace for people starting from zero. For the people this city usually ignores. The flashing lights of the police cruisers painted the night in chaotic strokes of red and blue. I stood on the high balcony of the entrance, looking down at the street below. 2 officers shoved Preston into the back of a squad car. He looked disheveled, stripped of his tie and his dignity. Just before they slammed the door, he looked up. His eyes found me standing above him, bathed in the golden light of the building he had built, but I now owned. For years, he had looked down on me from his pedestal of arrogance. Now, the roles were finally reversed. I did not smile. I did not wave. I simply watched as the car drove away, disappearing into the dark artery of the city. The crowd dispersed quickly, fleeing the scandal like rats abandoning a sinking ship. The grand hall, once filled with the noise of clinking crystal and false laughter, was now silent. Confetti littered the floor like the debris of a battle. Harrison walked toward me, his footsteps echoing in the vast, empty space. He held out a sleek, electronic key card encased in heavy platinum. "The master access key," Harrison said, his voice soft with respect. "It opens every door, every safe, and every elevator. It is yours, Chairman Maya." I took the key. It felt cool and heavy in my palm. My mind flashed back to that night in the rain, when Preston had thrown my suitcase onto the curb. I remembered the cold water soaking through my clothes. I remembered the way he looked at me, as if I were nothing more than refuse to be discarded. I squeezed the platinum card until its edges bit into my skin. That woman, the shivering librarian who begged for love, was gone. She had died in the rain that night. I turned my attention to the massive oil painting hanging in the center of the lobby. It was a 10-foot portrait of Preston, posing like a conquering hero with the Titan rising in the background. It was a monument to a man who no longer existed. I walked over to the wall, with a strength I did not know I possessed. I grabbed the heavy gilded frame. I pulled. The wire snapped with a loud twang. The portrait crashed to the floor, face up. Preston's painted smile looked ridiculous now. I picked it up and jammed it into the large industrial trash bin the caterers had left behind. "Burn it," I told Harrison. I walked out through the main glass doors. The storm that had raged during the ceremony had passed. The air was crisp and clean, smelling of washed pavement and new beginnings. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the oxygen of freedom. I pulled my phone from my clutch. There were 15 missed calls from a number I knew too well. I did not listen to the voicemails. I pressed the block button, erasing Preston from my digital life forever. Then, I dialed a new number. "Hello, Ms. Maya," the voice on the other end answered sleepily. It was the lead architect. "I am sorry to wake you," I said, walking toward the curb where my driver was waiting. "But we have work to do. The Titan is dead. I want you to draft new plans. We are tearing out the luxury suites. I want open workspaces, community gardens, and affordable housing units. But that will cost millions to redesign, the architect stammered. Then spend millions, I said. Start tomorrow. Tear out everything that reminds me of him. My driver opened the rear door of the Phantom Rolls-Royce. I slid into the leather seat, the scent of fresh vanilla enveloping me. As the car pulled away, gliding silently through the streets, I looked out at the skyline. The city was a glittering grid of lights, vast and full of potential. I was no longer the wife waiting at home. I was the one moving the pieces. The game was over, and I had won. My empire was just beginning. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I really hope you enjoyed this journey of justice and reclamation. Please leave a comment below and let me know where you are listening from. I would love to hear your thoughts and connect with you all. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel. Like this video, and please hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people. See you in the next one.